Hi there, my name is Andy Farquharson and I'm your host on Alternative Exit, the podcast dedicated to educating small business owners about the possibilities, benefits and challenges of transitioning to an employee ownership model. Did you know that there are over 200 million SMEs around the globe with an owner that will be retiring within the next 10 years? Many of these owners will never actually find a buyer for their business, forcing them to close their doors, wreaking havoc on their employees and the communities. There is an alternative. This show will explore different forms of employee ownership and the best practices for a successful transition. Each episode is going to feature interviews with experts on employee ownership, business owners who've successfully made the transition, and consultants who've helped facilitate these changes. Okay, now let's get on with the show. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Alternative Exit. Today's guest is Robert Postlethwaite. Now Robert is the partner and managing director of Postlethwaite Solicitors and also author of the Employee Ownership Manual. So with that experience and also being one of the UK's most prominent experts in employee ownership and share schemes, he brings a heap of credibility to this conversation. And on top of that, he not only advises his clients, but he's also modelled employee ownership within his own firm, recently transitioning the firm to an employee ownership trust over in the UK. So, Robert, welcome to the Alternative Exit.
Thank you very much, Andy.
All right. So, when I speak to people in the UK, and we ask about who are the most sort of experienced people with regards to EOTs, your name consistently comes up. I mean, what initially drew you to the space to start working on these types of transactions?
Yeah, well, this is excellent question. Going back quite a long time to when I was right at the beginning of my legal career. So I started life after qualifying as a solicitor in the UK as a corporate lawyer. And that meant I was spending most of my time on things like management buyouts and clients buying companies from other people and so on. And that was kind of, interesting. And it felt like there was a positive purpose to it. But I felt there was something missing. And in my grandiose approach to life, in my mid to late 20s, I decided that there must be a better way of organizing business, which gave more people a stake in its success, and which also gave them a kind of, a motivation for getting more engaged in the business they work for, which wasn't necessarily strongly present. I also became quite interested in, more than quite interested in changes to the environment. We were beginning to learn about this thing called climate change. And I thought, well, maybe it would be useful if people who work in companies, some of which are contributing to climate change, had more of a stake and an interest in what their companies were doing by being owners, and maybe that would have an impact on corporate behavior. So there were some other reasons as well, but those were some of the drivers for me beginning to think about other ways of organizing business. And employee ownership was something I started to investigate. There wasn't much of it around then, but there was some. It was a little bit of a minority sport.
Okay. What were the models that were prevalent then?
Well, lots of people will have heard of the John Lewis model, and that was thriving as a very successful but also very well-known employee-owned company in the UK. There were some others. There were quite a lot of much smaller businesses that were cooperatives, so they were quite a pure form of employee ownership, and many of them were very successful, but there weren't loads. So yeah, as I say, it was something of a minority sport.
So, look, there's a lot to unpack there with regards to sort of, I guess, your journey that's gone through there. I mean, I love the idea of having that change, that idealistic sort of desire to want something more from your job and making action out of it, like in your early to late 20s. Not many people are willing to walk away from sort of a corporate career to go pursue that and hang up your own shingle. I mean, what do you think gave you the confidence to be able to go out and do that?
Yeah, good question. I think it was a mix of things. I'd kind of reached the point where I really so much wanted to do something different, um, that I'd kind of lost interest in the mainstream corporate world, actually. Looking back on it, sort of slightly reckless approach to building a legal career. Um, and
Well,
I
reckless approach to starting one, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I came across another lawyer who was working in Leeds, who I really feel I should mention, because he's still a practitioner in employee ownership as well, called Malcolm Lynch. Um, and he was the only person in the country who was actually running a legal practice that specialized in cooperatives and employee ownership. So I contacted him, and we met up, and he offered me a job, which involved moving from Bristol to Leeds. And I'd recently got married. Without going into too much personal detail, my wife was from the north, and her family lived in Manchester, so it kind of made sense for us to relocate. So we moved, and I spent 4 years actually working with Malcolm, and learning about how to be a lawyer in this area.
Okay, all right. So that's good. There's someone to sort of take you on that journey. I think that's the more that I talk to people in the space, especially people like starting employee ownership in new countries, that having those, like, having a group of advisors or having some technical experts is just critical to be able to improve everyone's education and awareness of the models.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
yeah, and we do, as a group of advisors, aim to be as collaborative as we possibly can. So on the one hand, yes, we are sometimes competing with each other. We're sometimes pitching to get business from the same clients.
yeah,
But equally, I think we do all have, well, not all of us maybe, but many of us have a shared sense of purpose. So where it's important to spread knowledge and help each other out with difficult questions that, we can't immediately answer ourselves, but we hopefully know someone who can.
yep. I mean, that shared sense of purpose is one of the amazing things that I've found within the employee ownership community. Everyone's just so generous, like so willing to be able to offer that advice. I mean, as you're seeing such explosive growth in employee ownership in the UK, I think what you're adding about 10 new employee-owned companies a week. That's going to bring different types of advisors, companies, like owners into this sort of broad house that is employee ownership. I mean, how do you see that? I mean, or how do you see that changing the shape and the nature of the types of people who are going to be coming into to employee ownership?
Um, Well, yes, in the early years of us having the employee ownership trust, so that came in 2014, and whilst there had been employee ownership before then, it was the employee ownership trust that really kind of kick-started the move to more companies become employee owned. Um, Initially, the types of company owner that we worked with from 2014, um, probably were maybe a little bit more at the kind of evangelical ends, and they'd been looking for a succession solution, that was, sometimes they didn't quite know what they were looking for until they found employee ownership, and they thought, yes, that sort of, I finally realized there's something that I was looking for. They were very strongly driven to do something different, for their own very personal reasons. Um, what we're seeing now is, not necessarily that kind of evangelical approach to what am I going to do with my business, and maybe I would say more pragmatic. Yes, we've rationally looked at all the alternatives, and we didn't particularly come into this discussion thinking that employee ownership was the only way forward. But having done all that, then the ones that do decide to choose employee ownership are doing it based on having rationally appraised all the alternatives and decided that's the best one for their company and their employees. I mean, there are some companies that won't have done that, and it's the tax breaks that really are the driver. Our clear position is always that if that's your only motivation, then it's much less likely that it's going to be successful. You do have to believe that it's right for your company and be prepared to invest time and energy in getting your employees engaged as owners. So there are a few outliers like that, but quite a small part of the picture, I would say.
Okay. I mean, obviously, in the UK, the tax incentives for selling to an EOT are incredibly attractive. I mean, zero capital gains is going to be appealing to everyone. But I think there's 2 points that you highlighted there. One is like it does take a lot of time and effort to be able to go through and make that cultural change to adopt to employee-owned mindset, and also there is still a reliance on the seller or the vendor to provide that deferred finance option. I mean, they're still selling, they're still funding the company, the sale out of the future free cash flows of the business. So it still sort of probably for me, does it still lean a little bit to the sort of benevolent, well, not so much evangelical, but more sort of benevolent founder who's willing, an owner who's willing to do that work?
Yeah, I think it probably does. If you were making a decision on what was going to happen to the future ownership of your company, and it was entirely driven by getting as much money as possible, as quickly as possible, then if there was a third party buyer out there which was credible, then you might well go down that route. So yes, I think you do have to have some other considerations bearing weight on the decision as well, which are more about legacy, importance of continued independence, what's best for the employees,
Yep.
long term. Yeah, that's definitely a factor.
Okay. And how many transactions do you think that you and your firm have done now?
Well, employee ownership trust. So disregarding the ones that we worked on before 2014, we're coming up to 200 now.
Oh wow. Okay, so that, yeah, a significant number. And what when you're speaking to them, I mean, you alluded to a couple of reasons, like a couple of sort of benefits that people have found in terms of, hey, look, I preserve my legacy, look after my team. But what do you see out of those 200? I mean, what's the most predominant, I guess, feeling that owners have after they've made the transactions?
So the most dominant reason is kind of a mixture of legacy and what's right for the employees, and a belief that it'll be good for the business long term. Yeah, I think that's how I'd answer your question.
Okay, yeah, look, it's a real sort of common theme, like from the owners that I've spoken to, like they genuine had a real care for the employees, and knowing that their employees are also going to look after their customers, which have brought them together, which is great. I mean, when you when you were transitioning your own firm to employee ownership, what were the considerations that you were thinking about?
Yeah, well, very similar to what we've been talking about. One or two extra ingredients, though. I mean, we, as a business, probably about 2/3 of our work by value is helping companies to become employee owned through selling to an employee ownership trust. And there was an obvious thing that we should be doing in our own business, which is to be employee owned ourselves. So if we're telling our clients that this is something that you should consider doing in your own business, then it kind of makes sense that they can look at us and say, well, yeah, we can see that you're doing it in your own. So that gives us some reassurance. So that
Definitely
was that.
helps the
There was that
credibility side too.
extra ingredient. Some of our
Yeah.
competitors aren't employee owned, so we like to think that might give us a little bit of an edge there. Hope so.
Yeah.
Um, but overall, I mean, we've always worked very hard on our culture. Probably easier for us to do than other companies, because we're relatively small. So there are our headcount is 10 overall. We've always valued having a very kind of collaborative, supportive culture. So a move to becoming employee owned was extremely logical fit with that. So that's another reason why it felt like the right thing to do.
Very cool. So back when you wrote the book, okay, which sort of, I love the title, sort of really pragmatic, the employee ownership manual. I mean, you obviously talk about a lot of the technical aspects, but then there's a big element around the people stuff. Right? What's important? I mean, what do you think is the most, I guess, underappreciated element of that when for sort of owners who are looking at an employee ownership trust?
Yes, I'm going to answer that. Before I do that, I'm going to give a very quick shout out to Jeremy Gadd. Hello, Jeremy, who wrote the chapter in the book on the importance of the people side,
Okay.
and which means things like how to start getting your employees engaged, how to let go as a founder when you're no longer running the business or owning it, and also how to approach it with your leadership team, because their support for this kind of different form of ownership is going to be essential. So yeah, let me see if I can identify the single most important people factor. I'm going to do this by reference to our own business, actually, because I can speak from the heart here. So we completed our transition to employee ownership 2.5 years ago, and so the ownership change, I would say, we found relatively straightforward. Lots of people here kind of already knew what employee ownership was because work we
That's
do,
what you did.
so you kind of got it. So the challenge for us subsequently to that has been leadership succession. So I was the founder of the business. I'm still running it. Still at least as engaged in it and enjoying it as I ever have been. Because as every day goes by, I can see more and more exciting potential for employee ownership to grow, not just in the UK, but also internationally. So hoping we can play our part in that. So what I'm saying is I'm not kind of desperate to stop being involved in the business. Equally, we do need to think about leadership succession eventually. So that's been something that we spent quite a lot of time thinking about. And I guess it's one of those situations where, as it turned out, I was an entrepreneur, and I learned to do lots of things adequately. And there probably isn't one person out there who can do all of those things. So if that doesn't sound, I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but it's just the reality of being an entrepreneur. You learn to do lots of different things. And then when you're thinking about who's going to take over, then is there a single person who can do all those things, or might it have to be more than one person? So that's the kind of question that we're looking at the moment.
Well, I guess that's the one that's most commonly that I get challenged with most commonly when I'm talking about employee ownership is, great. I mean, the employees aren't going to be motivated to get in there and turn the lights on if someone's sick, or to do the books, or to put up chip in a little bit of money to potentially do to bridge a shortfall of cash to pay wages. So there's a, but I don't know, like what's your perspective when you get people saying similar things?
I mean, this is where it should also feel a lot more positive. So I now feel like I have a following wind behind me, with most things that need to be done in the business. So I'm, following wind behind me, pushing at an open door. Often I'll decide we need to do something, and then as it turns out, somebody's already thought about it and has started doing it. Or if they haven't, I mention it, then the next day, action will have been taken. So yeah, people are definitely taking responsibility for important things in the business. And sometimes all I have to do is just give a little push, and then things start happening, making my life easier.
Okay, very cool. And so that obviously, I mean, you needed to change how people, like how decisions were made in the business, and how you sort of empower people to go take action like that. What were some of the things that you did to, I guess, change that culture and decentralize that sort of action with, yeah.
Yeah, well, we've been doing it since sometime before we became employee owned. So one of the first things we did that I noticed it was having an impact was um, um, initially in the very early stages of our business, I was kind of doing almost everything from an administrative view. Um, we did have some other lawyers, and we recruited somebody to be a practice manager. Um, and I started involving her in loads of the decision making, because she had a really sound head on her shoulders and all sorts of experience and lots to contribute. Um, and one or two members of the legal team were a bit kind of slightly cross about that. They felt she was being involved at a level that she shouldn't be because she wasn't a lawyer. She was a business manager. And I thought, no, she's got loads of business experience. So perfectly logical for her to be involved in our decision making. So I wouldn't say it was a battle, but it was just a kind of, a little discussion that we had to have, so everyone understood what the merits were of being more involving of more people. And that was the start. So we've always been, since then, had that kind of built up that kind of approach, if you like, that there are very few decisions that are made in the business by the directors only. And we have two directors, both solicitors. But most things are decided involving more members of the team.
Okay, and so how do you define what type of decisions can get made by directors versus the team? Is that it, or is that something that you've already planned?
No, we just kind of know. We know what they are, and so let me try and give you an example. So we might have a decision about whether to take forward a particular application for a job, maybe at a senior level, um, and initially that's likely something that the two directors would look at. Um, but before we went much further with it, it's pretty likely that a larger group of people would be involved. Then eventually, before we made a decision to recruit, we probably announce it to the whole team. So there's one example. I'm going to try and think of another just to kind of flesh that out a little bit more. So we've spent some time recently developing our strategy moving forward. Um, and that probably wouldn't work with a committee of 10. So we've had a smaller group um, working on strategy, and then we presented what we'd done to the whole team. Um, and then we presented it to the trustees of our EOT, who actually came up with quite a few helpful suggestions. So a smaller group working up a plan, larger group consulted, and then allowed to input. That's the basic approach there.
Okay, so it sounds like it was very. I mean, you were operating in a very democratic approach, like in terms of, and which aligns to how you started the firm in the
Yeah,
first place.
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Very cool. All right, so if we go back to these, I mean, the transactions, right? These 200 plus transactions that you've done. I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge for people coming into a transaction for employee ownership?
What as a client or a company?
As an owner, like as an owner coming into it with for the first time, and it's probably the first time they've heard about it.
Yeah.
What do you see as the biggest challenges for people coming in?
Well, we sometimes say, sort of slightly tongue in cheek, um, that, and don't quote me on this, that the part that we do, which is the kind of the structuring, the legal and the tax advice, um, in some ways, that's the easy bit.
Okay.
We don't.
Well, Robert, you do know this is a podcast, so the secret is out now.
Oh no! Oh, what have I said? We'd like to think that we make it the easy bit because we explain things really clearly. We listen. This podcast isn't meant to be a sales thing for us. So I'm going to curtail this line I'm going down very, very shortly. But the point I'm making is that actually the harder things are, it takes us back to the people side, and probably the single hardest thing is for an owner who's transferring to an employee ownership trust is realizing that A, they're no longer the owner, and B, not necessarily at the same time, they're no longer running the company on a day-to-day basis. And or if they are still running the company on a day-to-day basis, but they want to stop, then how are they going to find a person or people to take over from them? So a mix of letting go and then finding others to take over. I would say those are the probably personally for owners the biggest challenges.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. I said echoes with a lot of what I've heard from others, but I think one part I'd like to press on that a little bit further is like, it's very easy for a lot of owners to understand the technical aspects and invest in the technical aspects. You know, I think sort of hearing from someone on the pod recently, Glenn Dott, talked about like how like at least sort of, I don't know, maybe 4/5 of the total sort of cost allocated towards the transaction go towards the technical aspects around legal and accounting. And people are really under investing on that people side. Is that something that you see as well, even though you're sitting on the transaction side? But yeah.
Yeah, I think he's right. And we often do raise with our clients that they might need some other external help with the non-legal side of things. So, for example, how to get themselves into a position where they feel more comfortable about letting go. It's not a skill set that we have, but there are others that do. But yeah, they often think, oh no, we can do that ourselves. It's softer stuff. You don't need to pay people to help you with that. But actually, to describe something as a soft skill, I think doesn't really do it justice. And so I think I agree with Glenn that.
Yeah, okay. Look, it's definitely sort of one of those, it's a constant challenge of getting people to invest in those softer skills, which
Yeah,
typically take a lot longer to change
yeah,
and implement.
exactly.
Now, I just want to go right back to the start. You talked about some of your goals for transitioning towards employee ownership, towards helping creating more democratic workplaces, reinventing work a little bit. But another element that you brought up is about the environmental impact. Now, this is something that's I hear sort of talked a lot, but it's very, people find it tough to connect employee ownership to the environmental potential sort of improvement in environmental impact. I mean, after you came into it with that ideal, I mean, after 200 transactions and sort of 10 plus years, I mean, what are you seeing in terms of sort of meeting to that ideal you initially set out with?
Yeah, I'd have to be very realistic and say that was personal idealism triumphing over any kind of practical view of how the world works. Um, we do have some clients where I would say positive things are happening. So I'll give you one example. So one of our EOT owned clients is a firm of architects, um, and they because building new builds involves lots of carbon, concrete, steel, you name it. Any form of new building is very carbon intensive. In this client in particular, we find that younger architects in particular, actually, but to be fair, it's not just the younger ones, but they probably feel it perhaps more intensely, are saying, how are we going to change the way we design buildings and build them so that there isn't so much of a carbon input? What are we going to do about finding out about new ways of manufacturing concrete, for example, that's less carbon intensive? And these technologies are beginning to come on stream. And they have a voice in asking those questions as employee owners that they might not have had previously. So that's my kind of shining example. In many companies, the ability to make an impact is because of the nature of the work they do. If the employees are interested in the topic, realistically is probably much more limited.
Yeah, yeah. I think that it's one of those things that you think intuitively it will have a positive impact in that, like, businesses, if they're going to be in their local community, they're going to make better decisions around looking after their local environment as well. Like, I mean, you talked about sort of white collar there with the architectural work, but sort of you've got sort of people in like you've got industries and trades which are more focused on impacting like the actual sort of environment around them. They'll start making better decisions because, as I said, it's theirs. It's their environment, it's their company. So I'm really looking forward to some more continued research into that space because, yeah, I think that intuitively it's there. Just love some data to be able to back it
Yeah,
up.
yeah, no, that will be really interesting to see that.
Brilliant. Hey, look, thank you so much, Robert. But we're coming close to the end. But before we get there, what I'd like to do is just ask you a fast round of 3 questions and get your quick response. How does that sound?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. So, who is the leader that you most admire in employee ownership?
Graham Nuttall.
A very common name I get given in that from anyone from the UK, which is great. Okay. So, what would you say is your favorite resource on employee ownership?
Oh gosh, well, I'm obviously not going to say the employee ownership manual.
Oh,
And as a
okay.
lawyer,
I think you already
um,
have.
you called me out.
Yeah.
Um, as a lawyer, what I find most useful, of course, is something that helps with technical questions that we don't, always know the answers. There is a book by a barrister called David Pett, which is called Employee Ownership Trusts, just been come out in its second edition. So that's probably the resource I use the most.
Okay,
Wearing
fantastic.
my
I haven't heard about that one. I'll be looking that up. And then what would you say to an owner of a business who's sitting on the fence regarding a transition to employee ownership?
Yeah, I would say we're not going to do a hard sell. So um, it's not necessarily right for every business. Really important that you evaluate its positives and negatives against the alternatives, and then make, an objective decision once you've done that. Talk to other people that have done it. Join the Employee Ownership Association. You will be able to have very honest conversations with other business owners or former business owners about what's gone well, and challenges if they've had challenges, and even better ifs as well. So I'd certainly recommend that as well.
Okay, fantastic. Now that's the end of the fast round, but Robert, I do have to just ask a question, that sort of a follow on. We talked about at the start, like at the start of that last question, is that it isn't going to be right for every business. What businesses do you see employee ownership not being a good fit for?
I think if you've got a very difficult culture in your organization, then employee ownership is going to be more of a challenge to make work. So I'll give you a real life example. We did some work for a company a while back, and building up an employee ownership trust plan for them, working with the founder. And then it came time to discuss this plan with other people working in the company. So there were other shareholders, so they needed to be brought into the fold. Other directors, they needed to be brought into the discussion as well. And when that was done, it became very clear that none of the other directors trusted the founder. He didn't trust them. He didn't trust the other shareholders. They didn't trust him. Nobody trusted anybody. And at which point I said, you need help. You need help with the whole organization and how people relate to each other. And you need to build up trust. Not something that can be done overnight. So we introduced them to somebody who helped them as much as they possibly could, but it was very difficult, actually. In the end, they did something else. But clearly, employee ownership trust was going to be a real challenge in that company. So that's an extreme example. We don't come across many companies like that.
Sounds like it's a mismatch of like the culture and owner, fit rather than sort of a company type.
Yeah.
That it needs to have the right
Yeah,
environment.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Robert, hey, thank you so much for joining us on the Alternative Exit. I mean, I really, really appreciate your time, your leadership, and thought leadership in the space. I mean, if people wanted to reach out to you, learn a little bit more about what you and your firm do, or check out the book, where can people learn more about you?
Well, check out the book. That's available from the publisher called Spiramus, Spiramus. So you can order it directly from them. You can contact me, find me on LinkedIn, or go to our website, drop me an email. Happy to have a chat.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put some links in the show notes for all the listeners. And Robert, thank you very much for joining us on the Alternative Exit.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to continue learning about employee ownership as an alternative exit, head across to abettermonday.me for additional links and resources. You can also make sure to subscribe or follow along in your favorite podcast app, and be sure to leave us a 5-star review.